we continue our introduction to personality theory course. And in last video, we start to discuss so-called social cultural domain of personality psychology. In this domain, we focus on different social and cultural aspects and differences between groups of people. In last lecture, we discussed three types of interaction between people and situations, including social selection, invocation, and manipulation, and different personality characteristics which connected to those types of interaction. In today's lecture, we need to discuss the topic of so-called sex differences. This is a very interesting field of studies which lies on the intersection of personality psychology, social psychology, evolutionary psychology, and behavioral genetics, which makes it very interdisciplinary and very complex. Of course, all the possible differences between sexes connected with a lot of aspects in terms of like social interaction, political agenda, and ethical issues, which makes this topic incredibly hot and debated, polarizing people even within scientific community on their views on how everything is working and how it looks like. So today we will try to investigate this a bit deeper. And we will start from an interesting book, which is called The Psychology of Sex Differences, which was published in 1974 by Eleanor McCoby and Carol Jacklin. So this book became some sort of milestone in sex differences and gender studies in the North America. In this book, Eleanor and Carol reviewed hundreds of studies and drew several key conclusions about how men and women differed. The year this book published is considered to be like very important in terms of history, how we research sex differences. And after that, the amount of publications on this topic became even higher. And basically, if we will try to classify researchers who study sex differences and their views on this complicated matter, we can classify them into two big groups, so-called minimalists and so-called maximalists. So minimalists tend to describe sex differences as small and inconsequential, while maximalists describe sex differences as big, at least moderate, but more often big and consequential. So minimalists focus on the distribution between men and women, and those distributions show overlap. So basically, it reflects that there is a small magnitude of effect, and the differences might be described as small. And whatever differences exist do not have much practical importance for behavior in everyday life. So according to minimalists, basically most of sex differences also caused by like just different upbringing and social practices and gender socialization. So basically, if we will start to raise all children the same way, for example, buying the clothes of the same color, encouraging for the same types of behavior, describing our kids with the same like adjectives and same personality traits, those differences, possible sex differences would be like super small and inconsequential. Maximalists, on the other hand, suppose that magnitude of sex differences is comparable to the magnitude of many other effects in psychology and should be not trivialized. So we shouldn't disregard that it considers small. And they suppose that even small sex differences can have large practical importance add that sexual differences are rooted in our biology, which we cannot disregard. And even if we will raise all children and nurture all children absolutely the same way, sex differences will manifest themselves, and we will clearly observe a lot of differences between people of different sexes. So this is a theoretical and research debate, which still is going on. So there is quite a lot of disagreement on this topic. And actually, this area of studying sex differences and gender is one of the most fast and advancing in psychology. So please be attentive to those topics, because in the next 5, 10, 15 years, we will get so much more new information on this topic, which may completely like change our whole understanding of sex, gender, and those differences between people. So nowadays we kind of have a lot of data, but it's very hard to classify and structure, because we're speaking about dozens of thousands of research projects. So usually for this purpose of classifying different research, we use the technique of meta-analysis. So meta-analysis is a procedure which helps to summarize the results of different studies. In meta-analysis, we usually use so-called D statistic. It's just score used to express a difference in standard deviation units. So I hope you remember standard mean and standard deviation as a primary statistical measures. So D shows the difference in standard deviation units. So positive D usually mean that men score higher on some characteristic than women. Negative D usually shows the opposite, that women score higher than men. But sometimes it can be reversed. So if you read the research article, please be attentive. Usually at the beginning of the article, where researchers describe the design of the research, they specify do they use like classical D score with positive means it's higher in men and negative higher in women, or reversed one. So D score usually can show small, medium, and large difference. So usually score around 0, 0.1, 0.2 shows small difference. Score between 0.2 and 0.5 show medium difference, and score 0.8 and higher shows 0.8 and higher shows a large difference. So again, if we think about standard deviations, the difference in one standard deviation is actually a huge difference. So not surprisingly, like numbers which are close to 1, which shows one standard deviation unit difference, are large. Smaller than 0.5 usually says that it's small difference. Half of standard deviation might be like almost random fluctuation between samples of participants. So knowing this, again, the positive means it's higher in men than in women, negative it means higher in women than in men, we can analyze the results of major meta-analysis on the topic of sex differences. So what do we know from these research findings, and what sex differences we kind of sure that exist? So first one is so-called inhibitory control. It's basically a core executive function, involves controlling our automatic or just focusing our attention, regulating our behavior, thoughts, and emotions. So if you have good inhibitory control, you can control your behavior, your thinking, and expression of your emotions, and you can regulate it. If you have low inhibitory control, you act impulsively, right? So inhibitory control showed the largest sex difference in childhood, with D 0 minus 0.41. It means it's significantly higher in girls than in boys. It's a moderate level difference, and it's important. So more recent study found even larger differences on impulsivity, with boys being much more impulsive, so minus 0.72. It's like between moderate and big differences. So boys regulate their behavior significantly worse, at least in childhood. Perceptual sensitivity. It's a parameter which can be defined as the ability to detect subtle stimuli from the environment. It also showed sex difference. Girls score higher, minus 0.38, so at moderate level. Girls be more sensitive than boys to subtle and low intensity signals from the external world. So they're more attentive and sensitive to quiet sounds, quiet changes in environment. They pay attention to that. Boys score significantly higher on surgency, including approach behavior, high activity, and impulsivity. So with moderate effect, 0.38, which obviously is connected with lower inhibitory control, as we already discussed a couple of minutes earlier. The combination of low inhibitory control and high surgency probably contributes in another, like a significant gender difference. It's physical aggressiveness. So physical aggressiveness is basically about, will you start a fight, physically punching and hurting other people? And here we see that boys are significantly more prone to use physical violence. D is 0.6. So it's between moderate and high differences. So at least around the age 13 years old. So this difference becomes smaller with age, because boys also learn how to control their behavior and so on, but still stays in adulthood. And actually almost 95% of all violent crime is committed by men from the age 15 to age 30. So this age group of men is the most dangerous in terms of physical aggressiveness. After 30, it significantly declines. Sorry. Girls score higher on so-called fearfulness, minus 0.34. Boys score higher on anger expression, 0.34. In other differences, if we will talk about big five traits, and not only like big traits, but also facets of those traits, you already know after studying dispositional domains that each big five personality trait has smaller traits included. There are so-called facets, and we can observe difference. So first of all, speaking about extroversion and agreeableness, we see that there are differences in aspects of this, but also in this table, what is interesting, it represented the difference between self-report data and observer data. So self-report data is how people characterize themselves, and observer data, what other people think about them. So we can see the differences between self-reported data and observer data, and sex differences. So we see that on like first three characteristics within extroversion, gregariousness, warmth, and activity, girls score higher, but the effect is small, right? On assertiveness and excitement seeking, boys score higher, and the effect is between small and moderate, right? So there is some difference between self-report and observer data. with this data being higher from observers for first three traits and a bit smaller for last two traits. If we speak about agreeableness, so not surprisingly, women score higher. We see like minus, it means it's score higher. And basically, the amount of effect is very similar for both self-report and observer data, with the biggest difference on altruism. So actually, like observers suppose that women even more altruistic than they think about themselves. So which means that men are score lower on agreeableness, being more competitive and more aggressive. So for conscientiousness, again, women score higher, but effect is very small based on self-report and just small based on observer data. For openness to new experiences, there are two characteristics included, feelings and ideas. So women score higher on feelings, men score higher on ideas. What is interesting, according to observer data, the effect is even stronger. And for emotional instability or neuroticism, women also score higher, with effects being between small and moderate in all facets, including anxiety, depression, and self-consciousness, like overthinking and so on. There are some sex differences in emotions, including experiencing and expressing emotions. So the biggest research examined more than 2,000 of people from Australia and almost 7,000 of people from 41 different countries in the world, and examined 8 fundamental emotions: for positive, affection, joy, contentment, and pride, and 4 negative emotions: fear, anger, sadness, and guilt. So participants use scales to indicate how frequently they experience those emotions and intensity of those emotions. So here we're speaking about self-report data, which we already know is a bit different from observer data. So we should be a bit more critical, even in spite this is a very big research. So what we see here is that on most of emotions, we have positive effects. So it means men score higher. So they report both more frequent emotions, both positive and negative, and higher intensity. There are no difference in emotions of pride and guilt, which is interesting. And on like anger, the effect is almost zero. So we can say that there is no difference between men and women on anger. But on others, we see small effects with scores not higher than 0.3, like for affection. So there are some differences, but they're not as big as we could imagine. And what is interesting is the anger parameter, which is counterintuitive, shows almost no difference between men and women. So speaking about self-esteem, which is also an important characteristic, men score higher on self-esteem with relatively small effect, 0.21, but it has a developmental aspect. So boys score higher in childhood and adolescence. In adolescence, the difference in self-esteem reaches a peak of 0.33, but this difference is started to shrink with age. And for example, just for adult people, it's already 0.10, so almost insignificant effect, which completely disappears up to 0 for elderly people who don't experience any sex differences in self-esteem. So this is interesting, and we can think about different possible explanations. from biological to social here, so it opens a space for interpretation, but the effect itself looks very, very interesting. So another 6 differences are connected with sexuality and emotional investment. So men show more permissive attitude toward casual sex, just having sex without relationships, which doesn't matter. So men score higher, 0.45, so it's moderate effect. And men view pornography more often, so it's large effect. Between moderate and large effect, 0.63 compared to women. Women score higher in emotional investment. It's a cluster of items from different self-report measures, including loving, lovable, romantic, affectional, cuddlesome, compassionate, and passionate. So more showing more interest in longer and long-term romantic relationships, with moderate effect of 0, minus 0.04, right? So 38, 39. So, and it's according to studies based on like participants from 48 different nations. So it should be quite reliable data. Basically, it's all sex differences we can describe. So let's come to conclusion for this and the last videos, introduction to social and cultural domain. So personality psychologists in this domain focus on broader social, interpersonal, gender-related, and cultural aspects of personality. Personality interacts with the situation in 3 ways: selection, evocation, and manipulation. We already know this. People are attracted, so speaking about selection, attracted to those who have similar personality characteristics, with the most desirable characteristics of agreeableness, conscientiousness, and emotional stability. People who score low on agreeableness and low on conscientiousness have higher rates of sexual infidelity in romantic relationships. Some personality traits evoke likability in other people. Usually it's agreeableness, some components of extroversion, and honesty, humility factor according to hexaco model. People with different big 5 profiles and dark triad profiles tend to utilize different tactics of manipulation. With, for example, people who score high on agreeableness prefer reasoning, providing reason and pleasure induction, and people who score low on agreeableness being prone to coercion or hardball, for example. Studying sex differences is a relatively new field of study with 50, 60 years old style field of study, which is full of debates and discussions, and most of results of studies can be interpreted differently, depends on your methodological position, like are you like minimalist or maximalist. In next video, we will continue studying those differences, but we will talk not about sex differences, but rather about gender differences. And we will try to explain and understand difference between sex and gender, and what we know about this part of social cultural domain for researching personality. Thank you.